Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. And this particular episode, I am talking about how long does it take to know if you love someone? That's an interesting thought. How long does it take to know if you love someone? There's some variables in there. I'm going to wax on a few things, but here's what I'm going to start out with. Obviously, everyone is an individual. And this is about you. This isn't about how they feel about you, because a lot of times we figure out our life by the way other people respond to us. And, that's not necessarily independent. And I'm talking about how you feel. And there's so many variables. Because, see, here's the thing. If someone is throwing a lot of strong emotion at you, then sometimes you just feel compelled that you have to mirror that back. So your feelings can sometimes be overshadowed. And if you've experienced that, see, it's hard to know if you're feeling something because it's you or if that's just somebody's influence. I call that like peer pressure. And, there are a lot of relationships that start out like that. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes you don't even know that you're experiencing something until somebody introduces it to you. So that's how some things begin. But when I'm talking about that love expression, that where you want to do something about this, where you want to be in charge of how this thing goes. See, that takes a while to develop, because as the chemistry in your body starts to transform, starts to tingle, starts to give you that itch that something else is going on, you have your life, your background, your experiences that are also a part of that. And you have all of these warning bells that are probably firing off. If love is new to you, then, and as it is with young people, then you might not even know what it is that you're experiencing. And sometimes we learn what we think love is because we interpret what movies tell us. We listen to song lyrics and we interpret what that is. But, collectively, all of these things impact, how our parents responded to love, what it is. And I'm talking about the romantic thing too. And all of that is part of that salad that's mixed in there. And you're trying to walk through this thing in life and figure out how it works. Well, how do you know, how long does it take to know if you love someone? Well, if you have experienced something in a way of a tingle and that first love, that thing happened right away. And it could even be infatuation. So I'll make that distinction. And infatuation has more to do with not so much loving someone as it is just this really chemical, emotional reaction to something that happens. And many of us have gotten caught up in that. And unrequited love has a lot of that kind of component to it. And unrequited love means somebody doesn't love you back the way that you love them. And sometimes there may be no love. And there's, again, a lot of songs that have been written about the subject. You can key in the word unrequited love, and it's an amazing definition. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give it to you right here. In the simple version, unrequited love or one-sided love is love that's not openly reciprocated or understood as such by the beloved. The beloved may not be aware of the admirer's deep and strong romantic affection, or they may consciously reject it. The Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary defines unrequited as not reciprocated or returned in kind. Now, if you've experienced something like that a number of times, which can happen over and over in your life, you're really going to be at a mystery as to know if you love someone. And it takes a long time to process through those things. That could be months. But when, let's say you get into the experience with a person and you're trying out things, you're spending time together, you're doing things, you're enjoying the shared experiences, whether it's going out, going to movies, taking a trip somewhere, and you sort of build on that experience as far as the time and the length of time that you spend. Because here's an interesting thought: obviously, when you first meet somebody, you can't spend all day and all night with them because that's you have lives. You have lives before you came together, before you even came to meeting this person, and your life should continue to exist. You shouldn't just necessarily have to do a 180 to be with somebody, unless it's life altering. If you're going down into the dumps and you meet somebody and they have an impact on you, that's great. Hey, that might be a good person for you to be with. But you have a life. And as you begin to spend more and more time with that person, it could be an hour this day, it could be 2 hours on another day, and you're doing things in which are useful to both of you that are functioning. And then you begin to spend that personal time together where you become emotionally sort of dependent upon each other, and you start building that connection. That's a kind of love, but I'm not saying that that's the deep, I want to spend the rest of my life love with you. So that is, again, that's on a different plane. That's like the matrimony plane. That's the way I'm going to love you forever and ever. And you know what? This even brings to mind something a few notches lower than that. You can love somebody and want to spend time with them and not have it necessarily be, I'm going to be with you forever. And you could experience that and enjoy that as well. But think about that unrequited love thing. Sometimes, that's the thing that's really unbalanced. And that's the really interesting thing about love. When it happens at different rates for different people. And you may find that whatever emotion that you're experiencing has a ceiling to it. And for that, that's your experience of it. And remember not to necessarily try to take it on for somebody else's sake. You're taking this on for you. And if that happens for you in 3 weeks, that's great. If it takes a little longer because it's about spending time together and figuring out how this thing gets dialed up for you, how emotional you want to be about this, that could take 6 weeks, a month, 6 weeks, a couple of months, a little longer. Here's an interesting thing. If, let's say you're going to college, and you have a class with a particular person and you're spending time together. It could be the whole semester of experiencing, having study groups and building on that, on that plane, on those things that you have in common to really see what this person is like. Because it's loving someone isn't just loving what you know about them right now, but it's also taking on what could come in the future, you see. And that's taking on something in a whole different plane because that's taking on the unknown. And that can be really scary. So this is another reason why how long does it take to know if you love someone? It's going to take some time because as you develop that experience of knowing someone, then, it's fun to be able to take a lot of the mystery out of it. And some people say, well, no, don't take the mystery out of it. And I'm not saying take all of it. Some of that mystery is exciting. It's alluring. It's great. But I'm talking about taking the mystery out of some of the unknowns, like the dark corners of people. Some people have temper tantrums, and how it's very hard to love somebody that's going to come out at you like that all the time, or even has a tendency, because that could be very scary. Those are some of the dark things that happen to people after you get hooked up with them for a long time and you're kind of tied into them. So that, experts tell you it could take from 6 months to a year or longer to actually know if somebody is right for you. So, do you fall in love with them before that? I think a lot of people do. I think you fall in love with somebody and then, you start to experience them on that more personal, deeper level. So that can happen a lot sooner. But when you're thinking about this, and again, I'm talking about the matrimony, I'm talking about the wedding ceremony and all of that, because that's a huge investment. We're at here in America, we have a divorce rate that hovers right around 50%. So how long does it take to love somebody? Well, it might suggest that a lot of those relationships, they were in love, but they didn't know enough about love in order to make it successful. So that's another reason to want to pause and think about it a lot longer. If you've been in a relationship that has some rough edges to it, you got to learn how to problem solve. And it's one thing to be able to get along with somebody, but I think the litmus test for someone is, how do they problem solve? Because you're going to have conflict in any relationship, and how you solve that conflict really is going to write the pages of the rest of your life. Because some people are terrible at solving conflict. Their relationship to conflict solving is everything they see on TV about sassing someone and thinking they can bully the other person. And if you have ever experienced that and how demeaning that is, it's not just the emotion behind it, because obviously people are invested. They can get very emotional. I know I've certainly been there, but I'm not about the demeaning part of someone else. I'm passionate. And being passionate, I think, is a good thing because I'm invested. I want things, and I want things to work out not only for me, but I want to work out for you. And if that's the case, yeah, I have to learn how to modulate that passion so that it doesn't seem menacing. But that's something that I've had to learn in my life's experience. So, but when it comes to that other part that is talking about having these demons and being in love with somebody that's got that, boy, that's taking on a lot of liabilities. I've even had the experience of loving someone that had personal issues with drugs and alcohol. And that was a big thing to take on. Automatically, I became a social worker. And that was probably the worst thing for me to want to do in my relationship, because this person could not reciprocate. And it wound up destroying the relationship for me. As much as I love them, I could not be in a relationship where my needs were not getting taken care of, because there came a point in time when I realized this. That took a while. It wasn't something that I could have known right away because it was hidden from me. But what I grew, what came of that for me and the growth was I learned to ask better questions. And subsequent to that, yeah, it did take a little longer for me to find that I could be in love with somebody else. You know, that thing with that person that I just described, that probably took 7 or 8 months before I was, and I was able to say I love you. The next time around, and I was usually very guarded about even sharing those words because I know those words mean a lot. So I don't say them just and being lighthearted about it. I know it means something. And it took a little longer the next time around because I had to be careful about how I was being selective, about who I was selecting to bring into my life. I felt like I knew myself in terms of, I don't drink, I don't do drugs. That's clear. But when you get involved with somebody who has a different spin on it than that can become a liability. And it ultimately, for me, in my experience, it did. Now, I'm not judging people that have that because, we have, there's a lot of aspects to that. And, I can cover that in another episode. But I just wanted to share my own personal experience. So falling in love, or how long does it take to know if you love someone? Obviously, everybody has their own personal benchmark. And I think what you use to decide when you're in love with somebody, it's not just that romantic chemistry thing. That's certainly great to have when you feel it, because that's a really good feeling to have. That's the endorphins kicking off, and those are good things. Those help a body live. Those are great things to experience. But when the stress and stuff is as high as your endorphins in being with someone, then that's not necessarily a good combination. You're not in love with that person. Don't be in love with that person. That's a lot of liabilities. And you need to figure that out. You need to know that. You need to know how that feels and say, that's a dangerous place to be. Go a different direction. And definitely take into account your life's experience. If you have a track record of picking, and I'm going to say this, I mean this tactfully, but if you have a track record of picking a lot of losers, you need to learn something different. You need to learn to do something different. Read some books, get some counseling, do some research, figure yourself out, why you keep attracting the kind of people that you're attracting, why you keep falling in love with the same kinds of people. You should be taking a lot longer with your time and your choices than just jumping into the next relationship just because you're lonely. That's not necessarily a good reason. It takes care of needs for a while, but over the long haul, you got to pick something that's a little more substantial because, again, those situations have liabilities that they're like demons in the dark, okay? And that stuff becomes scary after a while. So like I say, avoid that. And, ultimately, you want to know how love feels. And it's not just a physical thing, but and I'm not talking about sex. I'm talking about the physical feeling that you have, that tingling in the spine. But there's something that's going to be going off in your head that tells you that you love this person, that you're happy. You are happy. Okay, and that you have an impact on somebody else. When those things happen for you, how long did that take? Take that into consideration. Think about how many months has it been? Has it been weeks, months? Did it take a year? Did it take a couple of years? Sometimes it may not happen the first time around with that person. It may be that it takes a while. You go through some experiences in life, and then you come back around and you meet that person again. How long did that take? Okay? That's your experience in life. That's what matters. This is something that you can invest in when you know the answers to those kinds of questions. And it's, avoid feeling the judgment of other people, because there are people that want to rush you into everything that you can, in all kinds of conversations. So be yourself. And that's something I've had to learn, because I remember when I would talk about this kind of thing with women, how I would feel as if I was being judged because I didn't answer it the way that they wanted to answer. And I was really good at knowing what people wanted to hear. But what I wasn't good at necessarily was verbalizing how I felt on the inside. Because I think I was afraid of being rejected and being alone because I didn't know I know that what I thought wasn't necessarily what they would want to hear. And I'm sure we can all relate to that. So I think you get my point. You get the idea. Think about it. It's something that's definitely very personal. And you learn life and live it at your own speed. Be proud of that. Be happy with that. And, I'm so glad that you're alive and that you can give some thought to this. And, if somebody happens to come along that makes it right for you, hey, grab them, invest your time in it, make good memories. And I'm going to be right back after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch, whatever it may be.
Hi there, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. And on this episode, I was talking about how long does it take to know if you love someone. And we covered a few things in the other segment. And something I'm going to transition to now is I've had this conversation. I've asked the question of people is, when do you have sex with someone? That's kind of out there. It's an out there question. And men and women generally tend to answer the question differently. guys tend to want sex as soon as they can because men have a physical urge that they think a physical itch they want to scratch. That's just being fairly blunt about it. I think it's a little deeper than that. I like to kind of give guys credit. Sometimes guys don't do a very good job of expressing themselves, and because of that, they come across being less than sensitive. So I'm going to try to demystify a little bit of that, especially for the women listeners. And for the guys, I would offer that you might approach being physically intimate with a woman, your partner, your future partner, in a little bit of a different fashion. Women tend to respond in a very emotional way about it. As far as the win, it's everything from maybe the third date to 3 months to 6 months. And, the 6 month thing probably sounds a bit long, but then there are others who also say no sex until after there's matrimony. And that has a lot of a basis in, for some people, it could be religious. And in others, it's because they happen to know that when they get into a physical relationship with someone that they kind of fall head over heels. And it represents a very emotional connection, attachment. And that's great. I mean, that really, I think, comes from someone who knows themselves fairly well. A lot of us tend to give in to the temptation, to the urge to be physical because we know that it feels good, or at least we're looking for it to feel good. If you haven't had it good and you have read about it or you've heard about it from your friends, then you're probably looking to have that great experience. And then there's people, and I'm speaking for the women that I've heard from, that say, well, they've not had great sex, and they keep hearing about it that it's supposed to be great, but they can't find it, so they're not necessarily going to really be out there looking very hard for it because they've been constantly disappointed. And I say, well, it takes practice on both parts. For the guys, and I'm going to demystify this a little bit. And I know women tend to think of guys as just wanting sex, only sex, and it is a drive. And granted, without it, we would not have children. We would not have continued to populate the earth. But I think there's something else about sex for men, and there is definitely a very emotional component to it. And I think it signals a sort of acceptance of the man when you will be physical with him. There is a vulnerability that men have a lot of times that they can't speak to because they haven't necessarily educated themselves to speak about the emotion, to speak about what it feels like to be accepted, to be respected, to be desired, to be wanted. They kind of get programmed into the thing that they have. It's the prey drive. We describe that in animals. You go after your prey, and then you own it, you consume it, and it's easy to get caught up in that because it's a thought that's how women seem to give the interpretation that they want to be chased, and by being chased, that's supposed to mean that the guy is interested. Well, there is a lot of truth to that. But when we start to define it as in only those very narrow terms, then it seems where is the love in that? And it doesn't show up. The love is in being vulnerable. The vulnerability of sharing yourself, of being desired, and saying that you want to be desired. And I'm talking about from a man's standpoint. Being understood that you have feelings, that it's nice to have the sexual drive and the sexual urge and to be able to satisfy that with your partner, but to know that it's not all coming from the guy. To know that your woman does want you, does want to be intimate with you, that's very important to a guy. And we're not talking just ego. And I know that's that's low-hanging fruit. This isn't about ego. This is more, it's more humane than that. And I think men appreciate being seen for their nurturing side because that's something we know that women like and women appreciate. We know that women appreciate that. But when we look at guys sometimes, we look at them as being simply a provider, as they hunt, they kill, they bring home the food. I mean, this is the hunter-gatherer of a part of our existence. And the conscript that women want to be taken care of still exists. So it's about negotiating all of those different roles and perceptions and then coming up with something that works for both of you. And it takes a little while. I mean, it really takes some thoughtful conversation to uncover these things. And it may even take some tears, because when you get down to the nitty gritty of talking about this stuff, we've all had some rough experiences around it, something that didn't work out so well. And you know what? Relationships give us an opportunity to live our life and to experience ourselves and to experience with another person. And when you get to have conversation with somebody about some of these very personal things, I think, and as I was talking about in my last segment about how long does it take to get to know if you love someone, well, now you can begin to have that conversation, because you won't have to say, I love you, but this kind of conversation shows that, man, this is a love connection that's happening, because we're getting down deeper, and we're not just talking about scratching a sexual itch and having an orgasm. We're really talking about things that, hey, I want to be seen as something other than what I am on the outside. And for an attractive woman, it may be something that, hey, I want to be seen more than for my good looks. And for a guy, I want to be seen more than just some guy with money. Because, as it is, it's not all about the money. Women have money too. So, you can, combine your resources there and make a great life. But, that's something from the guy's perspective, that sometimes it feels like it's always a competition, that when you're a guy who's pursuing a woman, it feels oftentimes that, okay, she's just basically going to trade up. And one of the things that happens to a guy in an experience like that is he's not going to be necessarily very emotionally connected. He's only going to go for the physical thing until he can, until it plays itself out. But if you begin to have these conversations in these other directions, I think what you find is that people can be deeper. They can have a better experience at the relationship. And it's nice to know somebody from that perspective instead of from how we sort of see things in a short-sighted way. And, pop psychology teaches you a lot of things, and it's usually the low-hanging fruit that is the term that I want to use. It's not the stuff that's really thoughtful, but the things that are just sort of throwaways that, you can make just make up stuff off the top of your head. So go deeper. When to have sex? Well, that question becomes one of those is when you are able to have an emotionally intimate conversation with somebody about the things that matter to both of you, and that you can remember the details of that conversation. You can begin to think about what a physical relationship can possibly mean. And it's more than just having a quickie, just having an orgasm. It is about the emotional connection. I don't think you do that in 3 weeks. I think you have, because of that honeymoon phase, you have a lot of wonderful conversations because you're compelled to do it. And, there's a lot of satisfaction that can come from that. You may be physically intimate at that point in time because you may think it feels right. I mean, I'm not here to judge you, but if I'm answering the question of when, I think it takes a little longer than that to really be in that place. So, I'm saying, 3 to 6 months. And that could be a really long time for a lot of people. But again, narrow it down to being able to have those really deep, intimate, emotional conversations, and it not just being about, it's just a simple throwaway kind of thing, but really understanding your values. So that's my answer. Hey, thank you for joining me in this episode of Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. And I'm your host, John Johnson, and feel free to join me next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.